Okay, we're recording. And so we are picking up in book 5. And we just left off with a very interesting section of book 5 where they essentially talked about the rearing of the guardians and essentially what you could call the Republic breeding program. But now the conversation moves into the warfare aspect of the Republic. And so having
the end of let's just pause there for a second. I think it's important to reiterate why this whole common breeding program or the Republic breeding program exists. It is to create a common concern. So if the Republic if everybody who participates in the Republic is concerned about the same things, they fear the same things, want the same things, they will act in unison. So that's the common concern. And so the rearing of the children as a commune takes away the ownership of the children by the parents. And then if everybody is focused on rearing the children, then it's everybody's common concern. All the right things would be done, and one would not be fighting against another for what they believe is their concern and not the concern of the other. So from there now comes the concept of, okay, so now we are in unison, we worry about the same thing, so there's no internal strife. What if there is attack from outside?
Right.
How are we going to deal with it?
I would just underscore what you're saying. You're right. The intuitive reach in the Socratic description of the Republic, what you call a common concern, is a unity, but a deeper unity than one would have encountered in their normal interactions in life.
Extremely good point.
So Socrates is talking about a unity that is so deep that when one individual suffers, everybody feels it. They all react to it. So we do make light of this as, sort of a eugenic breeding program, but the intention behind it, though, is a level of unity such that all children are viewed as belonging to the entire Republic. So that if one child gets sick, everybody reacts as if they were the parent. And again, he's getting at this idea of a deep unity and a deep harmony that transcends the classes, and one in where all pleasures and triumphs are equally shared and all tragedies and consequences are equally shared. So yes, it is. It is a very deep unity, I would say a very rigid and almost unbreakable entanglement as it pertains to concerns and consequences of the people of the Republic, the citizens.
Yeah, it's like an anthill.
Yeah, right.
Right, we are like ants with a conscience, with
a shared conscience.
Right, I'm saying that humans, are social like ants, but we have the sense of self.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that, because when I was reading this part of book 5, the word that came to my mind is like, oh, it's going to be like a hive,
right?
Where you share
correct
the project.
The reason why we don't behave like a hive is because we have this innate ability to differentiate between mine and yours. And even though we are within a collective of sorts, it's a loose collective. And that's where the point that you made about a deep collective.
Right.
Where it's just so primal. Like the most primal thing you would say is yours would be your offspring.
Right.
The most cherished possession you have. And even if that is shared, like ants or bees or wasps, that would be a whole other way of looking at it.
Something beyond allegiance and something more akin to like what you would consider your limb.
Kinship,
an extension
way,
of yourself.
right? Yeah.
Kinship, right.
No. So and so that is the societal way of looking at it, which, I have to keep coming back to the point that the Republic is the Republic of the mind. And so we had some thoughts about what would that look like? What is this offspring of, a guardian, the offspring of a laborer, the offspring of a philosopher king, And what are these offspring? And inside the structure of the mind, we're talking about rational principle that rules, and then the guardians being the spirit that carries the dictates of the rational principle, and then brings it into the realm of action or second order thoughts, and then action, which would be the laborers and the money making and the auxiliary and stuff like that. So in that thought process, and where do offsprings fit in? Well, then we were thinking of the thoughts that come from thoughts, and how those thoughts then are acted upon. So if you were to think of a common purpose, a common interest, a common concern when it comes to thoughts, it would be that if you have bronze thoughts and thoughts that come from bronze thoughts, which would be the money making part, the labor part, as opposed to gold thoughts that come from the rational principle, they should not all be treated the same way. But if the bronze thoughts believe that these are bronze thoughts that came from bronze thoughts, and they are, and quote unquote, they are mine, as opposed to the gold thoughts that don't come from me and so they're not mine, there would not be union of the mind. So there has to be this process where all the thoughts that come from source, from the primary thoughts, the secondary thoughts that come out of it, the actions that come out of it, have common ownership by everybody, and they're acted upon based on their merits, not based on where those thoughts came from. And this is just my thought, this is just my way of thinking about this, but one would say that action in your profession, when your profession is aligned to the money-making part of it, and action in your profession when it's aligned with the common good, with justice, with equity, would be different. And it's important to have a unifying principle so that when you're out there looking for a place to work in, you're not making the decision based on how much money there is to be made. It is important that you get paid to do what you're doing, but it's also important where the focus of that labor is going to be and how it's going to impact the world. That has to also factor in. And if you have unity of your mind, your rational principle would say, choose a profession where you're getting paid to do good work. And that good work means it participates in the common good, as opposed to forget the common good, you're getting more money. That would be more of a bronze thought. So that's just how I look at it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that interpretation. And I think we talked about it at the last episode. So the truth is that the citizens and the children, the analogy was that, well, these are just new thoughts, right? Because thoughts are easily reconfigured into ideas. People get ideas about things to do or how they should think about things. They construct belief systems. They construct rationales for decisions that you're going to make in life. And so you want to select for the ideas and thoughts that align with the common good, as it were, for the different classes of the components of your individual soul. So to the extent that you have a goal to align your life with well-being or virtue, then you, just like the children in the Republic were being selected based off of their natural abilities and how well suited they are to their purpose, then you should similarly select thoughts based on how well suited they are to achieving your well-being. And so that, in my mind, is sort of the analogy. And now ideas can also come from other places too. And so I think this brings up an important point, in that one should spend very little time concerned about the source of a thought and more about how well suited it is to the point, the premise, the goal that the action in accordance with that thought will achieve, if that makes sense. And so what it does is it essentially really inoculates you from bias to the extent that you're able to accomplish a full-throated adoption of this approach. And you really, at that point, become an examiner of ideas and thoughts, your own and those that you get from others, and you use as your ruler, you use as your grading system how well that thought is suited to a larger purpose. And there's actually a very practical result of that discussion where Socrates starts talking about the involvement of women in traditionally male-only roles in this hypothetical republic. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in the process of talking about strictly assessing ideas, aka citizens on their merits, that you'd end up in a discussion where you realize that gender alone is a bias, is a source that should be ignored in favor of the merit of the individual or the merit of the thought or the idea that has emerged.
Right. And this now is a great segue into war, because as you said, ideas can come from within or they can come from without.
Right.
And it requires examination. And if an idea fails to pass muster and it is still trying to invade into your thoughts and action space, we need to come up with, the Republic, instead of our mind, needs to come up with a cogent defense against it. So what does that defense look like? So first we can talk about it from the standpoint of the Republic as an of the many.
So from within the conversation, so the kind of summary of the discussion points. So they start talking about how women and men will go to war together in light of this new understanding of the role of women in the Republic. And then they even, interestingly and surprisingly, talk about bringing their kids to the battle, which I thought was interesting. And they rationalize this by making statements that, using the example of animals, that animals will fight better in the presence of their young. They're more aggressive. They're more, the stakes are higher. So they're going to be very, very aggressive in battle at that point.
The women and men going into battle together is, I think, an excellent point that is brought up here. And look at the time, right? I mean, this is 2,000 years.
Yeah,
this is just, it's amazing. And there were still conversations about should women participate in war. Now, I understand from a physical constraints standpoint, yes, there are some things that men, are physically better suited to do. There are tasks that women are better suited to do. And so you got to find...
but the suitedness is the key, right?
The suitedness
and that's the point that we were making earlier. And
at least there is something to be said about the fact that it is not that one is unsuitable for war. So that is not the question here. It is, suited, better suited, but suited nonetheless. And when you're talking about the war inside of our mind, when we spoke about natures that are more masculine and feminine, like, nurture versus aggression and all of those concepts. When it comes to a thought that is assailing you from the outside, an idea that's coming at you from outside, you need all of those aspects of your being, of your republic inside of your mind to combat, to come up with a cogent defense. And so men and women riding into battle together, right? It also increases the number of forces that you have. Why should only half your population be ready to fight when you have an equally capable half, right, who can defend? The more people you bring to your defense, the stronger your defense is going to be. Against an army that only brought half its population, you brought your full population. Everybody came to bear.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect, but that's from a republic standpoint, and that is from a grand republic standpoint. But from the republic inside of our minds, I believe that we have all of these tendencies and we have all of these natures, and we can bring to bear all of this in unison against an argument. Now, regarding the children part, and the reason why they bring that there. One of the reasons why Socrates says it's important to have your kids, he does make the argument that if a soldier's child is in the battlefield, that soldier has a lot more to lose, and so will fight more fiercely or boldly. Yes, I mean you can. That's a very linear claim. I would like to say that the other argument made more sense to me, the one that first of all, no denying that if the stakes are high, you're more likely to give it your all. I agree with that. But the other one about the kids come to battle not just to increase the stakes or risk for their parents. They come to battle to see how their parents perform and what is expected of them. Mentorship is a big one that comes to mind. How do you know what you need to be doing? It's like, he gives an example, like a potter's child will help in pottery starting at a very young age. Like they are around the workspace, and then, as they get more nimble with their fingers and they're more capable, they start making the pots, and eventually they take over the profession. So if that's the case for a potter, why wouldn't you make the same case for a soldier or for a ruler, to have their children who have the capability to do it participate in the process? So I like that argument better than the former one where the stakes are high, but I get both those arguments.
Yeah, I think actually they're making both points. They sort of, in the discussion, are sort of saying, oh yeah, we'll bring the children to battle, and these are the benefits. And so one of them would be that, well, maybe the soldiers will fight more vigorously because their own young are at risk. Then the other point that you bring up is the other benefit that they talk about, which is that, the kids will learn through observation. And so like apprentices, they will essentially see what they will be responsible for doing once they, come of age and fulfill the role. And then after this, they begin to enumerate all of these sort of rules of warfare, like how will they handle different situations. And so guardians who happen to become derelict during battle will be, instantly demoted. And then the part that really got me was they talked about how if any of the guardians ever get captured, they'll be presented as gifts to the captors. so that means if you get captured, there's not going to be a rescue.
Well, actually, I think
you'll be deemed a gift to the enemy.
I would not take it. I would push back on that a little bit, because that actually is and now when you said it that way, it actually made sense to me. So and I think here's the reason why. So Spartans would say that about themselves. Like Spartans would send, like a single Spartan could go to an outfit that is not a part of Sparta and could motivate and rally the troops to do things that they would have otherwise not been able to do. Just a single Spartan. That's how well they were trained. And Spartans would say the same thing. I think a lot of this comes from Spartan
oh, yeah, for sure.
Culture, where if you were good enough to capture one of ours, kudos to you. It's nearly impossible for you to do it. But if you did it, kudos to you. This Spartan now belongs to you. But there's, I think, a little bit more. There's something else to be said here. This guardian who has gone out there and has been captured, right, now gets an opportunity to change the minds, because this guardian is not just anybody. They have the ability to go change someone else's mind. So if you and me have a conversation, right, and I have this idea that's guided by my rational principle, and I lay that idea out to you, but you heard the idea. You cannot take away the fact that you heard it, right? But you're not convinced. My thought going to you was not it didn't convince you. It had been over your mind, but now it's planted in your mind, though. It is going to work for me.
You're talking about it from the mind, in the mindscape analogy of the Republic.
Yeah. In the Republic of the individual,
right.
There's a thought, there's an idea, there's a conversation that's happening. I get an argument that comes with my idea in my direction. I say, no, this makes no sense, and I'm giving you a response. My guardian is going out there and saying, hey, this is not, right. This is the reason why.
Right. You can't unhear a concept that you've, quote unquote, captured into your own intellectual network. But the direct quote here says, and if anyone is captured alive by the enemy, shouldn't he be presented to his captors as a catch to use however they wish? Now, in the practical Republic scape of that, yes, there are some significant implications, and a lot of it is influenced by the Spartan mantra of warfare, which is to come back with your shield or on it, right? So you're not going to surrender by any means. And then if you are captured, then kudos to the enemy. Yeah. And so, but in the terms of the mindscape of the Republic of the mindscape, it's essentially a thought that is captured, digested, interpreted by a quote unquote opposing mind. And then it's there for them to do what they wish.
Right. And they don't accept it. They're not defeated by it.
Right.
But that idea is implanted.
Right. It's there, and it's hard to, or virtually impossible to forget. It's something that, if you take it seriously, it's something you have to contend with and contemplate. Right?
You would have to have taken it seriously if you were able to capture that thought, right? Because you are going up against a unified republic in someone else's mind, and you have done a very good job of arguing, and to a point where you feel like you have broken down the other person's attack. That means one has to have inside of their minds the formation of a republic too. They also have to have unified thoughts in order to break someone else's republic.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It's like going up against Nelson Mandela in a discussion about about apartheid, right? Not everybody's going to be convinced, but whoever touched and had a conversation with him, and I'm sure he had conversations at different levels with all sorts of people, very smart, bright people who are a lot philosophers in their own right? They all came away with something.
Right. There's a pyrrhic aspect to it. There is an attrition aspect to it. So if your opponent is like-minded in as much as they value thoughts that resonate with sense, then you're more likely to have soldiers that are captured. But if your opponent is somebody who's closed-minded, somebody who's more into just scorched earth, death and destruction, well, two things are happening at that point. A, the conversation is not even a real conversation. There's no thought exchange. There's no search for truth. There's no examination of an idea. And so then there's no soldiers being captured at that point. Right. At
that point, there's no war. If you come upon an argument that is so inane, right? It's just absolutely... you wouldn't even fight it.
Most arguments nowadays.
That's true.
You flip through TV and you'll see these interviews and there's just a lot of just fortifications and very little exploration, very little examination. And it's mostly just mutually reinforced entrenchment of positions is what you'll find. And there's no soldiers being captured in that case.
And no, I mean, it's almost like, you wouldn't have an argument with your toddler.
Right. You're just watching a siege. You're not watching an exchange. You're not watching a debate or an argument. That's a vigorous, full-throated examination of a concept or an idea. There's no mutual search for truth at that point. It's mostly you're watching a siege. You're watching whose fortifications will hold up best against the others. And so, soldiers aren't being captured in a siege.
And like I said, right, you're not going to argue with your toddler.
Right.
There's no capture.
Well, because you'll lose every time.
That's true.
But you got to bring them to war, though. You got to put them on a fast horse. That way, if things go south, they can get out of there.
So they do talk about that. It's coming away from that. So I think that's where the capturing of the soldiers and stuff. And then if there's a thought that wins, they talk about that, right? There should be wide acclaim of that thought. Or say there's a soldier who achieves, accolades in battle. They should be given all due respect and all that. And so they should be sub-selected to be then the sire offspring and all of that. And that kind of makes sense in the Republic of the Mind. If there's a thought that now you have kind of honed to perfection, so much so that when there is a sailing from without, you're able to then rely on that argument and convince the other person. Then you have to take that argument and make sure that argument is a core feature of who you are as a person. And all subsequent thoughts then come from that. Now, it doesn't have to be convincing another person. It could also be overcoming a challenge in life. And I think that's where a lot of resiliency comes from, right? Where that's the hero's journey. You come upon a problem, you don't know the solution, you fight through it, and then there's a change in the way you think. And so next time that problem comes upon you, because the way your thinking has your thinking has changed, it's no longer a problem anymore. Right. So that would be honoring the thought process that has changed the way you now look at that obstacle. You're able to circumvent that obstacle. Now that becomes the generator of thoughts. Once you break away from this concept of owning things, the more things I have, because you're looking for adulation from outside. I want someone else to look at my life and say that I'm living a great life, as opposed to you turn the process inward, realize the happiness needs to come from within. So
Yeah.
that'll be one such soldier who prevailed, and now you are letting all the subsequent thoughts and actions that come from that thinking come from that soldier. So that's one. But then the concept of having your children at the battlefield, and so Socrates says, yes, you should have your kids at the battlefield, but you don't want to subject them to too much risk. Like if things are going really bad, you don't want them around looking at the carnage. Falling.
They need an evac plan.
Right, you need an evac plan. and I think that's a tough one to kind of show. So
so you're trying to come up with the mindscape analogy.
Yeah. And so he talks about the fact that you should bring your kids to war, but they need to watch it from afar. And they need to be mounted on these horses, which are not horses that are going to get in, aggressive horses that are going to get into the fight. They're going to be horses that are fast and nimble, who can get out of there if the proverbial shit hits the fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what does that look like? And now I have to say that
I can tell you what I think.
Okay, go ahead, please. I've been going on.
I think what it is that as you're in conversation with, and I'll use the word opponent, but I think I'm going to stop using the word opponent because I think there's a larger point that's being made at the end of this chapter that I'll get to. There needs to be a way to where in the process of examining new ideas that you're not too quick to surrender to them, to adopt them. There needs to be a testing process. And I think the analogy of keeping the children you've brought to war on a fast horse means that while you're in conversation or in argument or within deliberation, you need to have a system where you protect the initial mindset, the initial goal that you had in mind. You need to be able to sort of, with one hand, wrestle with the new idea, but with the other, still protect your original framework. Because otherwise, you will potentially give in too rapidly. Yeah. So when a new idea comes to test you, it should be tested, and it should actually go through a test. And I like that you brought up the idea of the hero's journey, because the central trope to the hero's journey in literature is the road of trials. Mm-hmm. Every hero goes through a road of trials. Mm-hmm. And I love the word trials because there's a double meaning in the word trial. Trial means a challenge or an obstacle, but then there's the trial like the trial of Socrates or the trial of deliberation. When you make decisions in life, it's essentially you're holding court in your own mind, and you're trying to make a decision based off of different types of rationale, some emotional, some rational, some driven by higher sense of a higher self or higher goals, some that are very driven by base drives. So as you navigate those trials, you're going to encounter ideas not only from others, but from yourself. And you want to test the merit of those ideas against some standard. And that standard needs to be adopted, but not blindly followed. And while it needs to be tested, it also needs to be protected to some degree. So you have to balance your examination of new ideas with what you understand. Things have to make sense before you just sort of give up on a mindset or a framework and adopt a new one, or one that might influence a new one that might form.
Yeah.
And this keeps you from overcorrecting.
Right.
This keeps you from going too far in one direction or the other. And I think the Socratic dialogues are implicitly mindful of this idea of having a balance to all of that. So yes, go into battle, and go into battle motivated by consequence, i.e. bring your children, but you have to have a plan to get the children out of there. So there's some prudence to that too, right? Because then all your thoughts get wiped out, and now you're basically potentially a mindless cog in some large totalitarian system.
Right.
Or you're being influenced by society unduly.
Because even this is that's very close to what I was trying to get at, but I like the way you put it, as that you preserve a part of yourself. And because one thing is for sure, that this republic that you're forming inside of your mind, that we are forming inside of our mind, and the rational principle, there is a limit to my ability to understand the difference between good and evil. It's based on my experience. Now I'm in my early 40s. But somebody who's in their 60s has more life experience. And if they've spent more time in contemplation, more time in voluntary action, their rational principle is a lot further ahead than mine. And so I have ideas about what should be feared and what should be loved. But I understand that there's a chance, because I haven't seen everything, that I could be wrong. And when I come upon someone who has seen more than I have, and there's a thought that comes from without.
Dude, there's a great paradox in all of this that I'm realizing. Your children's thoughts, that's the old you.
Yep.
Like the thoughts, the children that are on that horse, those are the thoughts that when you're an older person. So it's actually your experience, your evolving prudence and experience in the mind. Those are the babies and the children. But that's how you're going to think when you're in your 60s.
Because they're looking at the experience that's going on right now and seeing that we lost. So how do we change?
They are informed by, they've been through, they're battle hardened. Right. They've seen it. They've seen the battle.
They've seen where we won. They've seen where we are losing.
Right.
And these thoughts that are coming at them, not all of them are terrible, inane. If they're inane, you wouldn't fight them, right? We're talking about these are really good thoughts coming from someone who has an ordered republic in their mind. And that's why your guardians are not being able to kind of hold up the argument and are failing.
Yeah.
And your future self is watching this and changing.
Yeah.
But they need to get out. Otherwise, every time you come upon a major crisis in your life, you just transform it into a whole new person.
Right.
And there's a problem with that, because what about all this experience that you gained coming up to that point?
Because if you become allegiant to every mindset you encounter, then that's essentially like having no mindset whatsoever.
That's right. And that means you cannot hold on to it anyways, because you've come across a new problem in the future and you'll be a whole other person. There is actually a concept that about vertical development. And we always talk about horizontal development. Like, we keep gaining new skills and kind of and improve, and we gain new sets of skills. I won't say improve, but horizontally within the sphere. Like, I'm a cardiologist, now I can be an interventional cardiologist, and I can do structural, imaging, and I can do all of these things. They're all basically stacked on sideways, right? As opposed to vertical development, where you carry a little bit of yourself forward and you keep going through these stages in life. But with vertical development, you can always go back a few steps depending upon the crisis that you face. Because there was a part of you that successfully navigated a crisis. So give you an example. Say you understand the common good, right? How harming somebody is a harm to yourself. Mm-hmm. But you're in a situation where you're being attacked physically. You are going to go down a few notches and fight back. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not about, survival is different, right? Mm-hmm. And now this is obviously an extreme example. Right. But there are situations where you would take a step back for your own personal, aims. Preservation right. In a way. And the reason you're able to do that is because those children have escaped and have still form a part inside of you.
And this is why, so that's why preservation, and I think Socrates said, well, I'll talk about this later, but I think you're hitting on why preservation is courageous. There's a preservation aspect to courage, which is to hold on. Now here you're talking about your own life, your own biological existence, but there's a preservation of ideas, there's a preservation of mindset. And so again, this is a classic example of why courage is not about being rash.
It's not about foolhardy, right?
Right. The courageous thing to do here is bring the kids. That seems rash. But have a plan for them to get out.
Correct.
That's courage. So that's not rash.
Understanding the risk.
Right.
Right. And having a plan. Risk.
Right.
Because if the horses are aggressive, they're going to join the battle. Right. And it's going to be a slaughter.
And to be foolhardy and just full charge, well, great. That's not courage because, now you lost the battle. All the children you brought along got wiped out. You lose your mindset. And that's exactly what happens. So people who are rash, that's exactly what happens.
Or the other way around. So sometimes you're rash and you would take up a cause. You'd be brainwashed to take up a cause because you're fearless. You don't fear anything. And so you would you would foray, and someone would say, you know what, I will take you into this war, and you can slaughter at will, and you would go because you have absolutely no fear. Or one could have a lot of fear and be a coward and change their ideology when they come upon somebody who plants an idea inside of their mind. And I think there is a reason why a lot of folks who are, if who've done terrible things have come from a place where everybody said, I could not imagine this person was the mildest mannered, weakest. I would have never imagined this person do such a terrible act.
Talk about like how did Nazi Germany happen? Like how is it that so many people became complicit in this system? And it's because they outsourced their critical faculties. I think when you outsource your critical faculties, that is a form of cowardice. It's intellectual. And that's actually ethical or moral cowardice is what it is.
So if you have...
So blind obedience to authority has that risk to it.
Yeah. I'm still trying to formulate what I was trying to say. And it's similar to what you're saying, but so if you have if your horse, all the horses are aggressive and all the children are in the battle, and everything gets slaughtered, and now you're the other person, you become, what is the term, brainwashed. But what's another way of saying brainwashed? Like, this is what happens to people online, where they get these terrorist organizations keep finding these folks.
Radicalized.
Yeah. That's the word I was going for. So you get radicalized if you're just super aggressive, and that can happen too. But you also get radicalized when you're a complete coward. Yeah. Like you're not engaging.
Right. You've outsourced your critical faculties. You've bought in without examination.
And there is a complete wipeout. Both ways, there'll be a complete wipe off of your internal republic.
Right.
You need a complete wipeout of your internal republic to do something as radical as blowing yourself up.
Right. So you can't be blind to new information, and you can't be completely acquiescent, or you can't fawn in response to new information and become radicalized, right?
You need to preserve a little bit of yourself.
Right. So courage, this is exactly right. This is why courage is a form of preservation.
There has to be some stake in it, right?
There has to be some risk, yes.
There has to be some risk, and the risk will only be there if you believe that the person who you are today actually matters. The experiences that you have gained so far actually matter. You have something to preserve. I cannot just let myself be taken in by this ideology. You see what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's where love comes from too. Right? Because in order for you to not be taken up by some terrible ideology, right? There's a terrible ideology out there, right? And that's why it's the children. It's the children that are escaping. Because that's where love is. This ownership, this common concern of love. Everybody loves the children. And the children get to witness and then keep secure. Because that is where love resides. You want to have the ability to love yourself, respect yourself, so that you don't get taken up by some crazy ideology. So
you want it, right.
You see what I mean?
You want to have, and maybe another way to look at it is that you want to have a framework, a mindset that is worth loving.
That's right. That's what I mean to say.
Right.
Like that's where self-respect lies. That's where self-love lies.
Yeah.
The more of that you have, and obviously you can be a narcissist, right? That's all we're talking about. We're talking about the fledgling thoughts, the thoughts that, you respect yourself because you know where you come from, right? Those thoughts have come from gold thoughts, from guardians, and we've seen those guardians get slaughtered. Now they are holding on to a little bit of that inside of them and are willing to change. But they're not going to completely give into a different ideology either, because they've been chosen, right?
Right.
Those kids that we're talking about are actually the thoughts that have been chosen to remain in the Republic.
Right. This is all making sense. This is why the Socratic exposition, this rationale makes more sense the more you read about it, because you're talking about self-respect. That's precisely how he described the soul.
That's what an internal republic is.
Right. Right.
You respect the self because your self is governed by the rational principle, which is the apex principle that knows the difference between good and evil. Right?
Cool. Okay, so we'll move to the next part, which is, so then they start talking about the rules of war, rules of engagement. So they talk about how heroic acts will be rewarded with honors, and soldiers who undergo a valiant death will be promoted to golden class if they weren't already. And, they'll be revered as daemons, or basically, spiritual guides, essentially. They talk about not despoiling the dead. They make the great analogy that, despoiling the dead is sort of like trying, sort of like when a dog gets angry at a rock that's been thrown at it, and not actually attacking the thrower, because they realize that the dead enemy soldier is really just the instrument of conflict, and so to show any sort of malice to what is now essentially a lifeless instrument or a lifeless piece of matter like stone makes no sense, because the intent behind that instrument is no longer there. So I thought that was a pretty almost poetic kind of explanation of why.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. It's almost like you don't want to. Once you have dealt with the idea or the thought that's come from without, you've dealt with it, you've prevailed. Now there's no point absolutely going after it and be in spoiling it. Like it would be almost like saying not to have judgment against someone's argument. It's almost empathizing with the other person, saying,
no, exactly, it is
that the reason why you don't get it.
Less and less comfortable with the word opponent.
Yeah,
right?
You empathize because that other republic that is fighting against you is, if you prevail, goes to show you that it is still fledgling, it's still forming, it is still going through the growing pains, it's still trying to organize itself. It's weaker, but that doesn't mean that you double down and you desecrate their thought process or their ideology. So many times I've seen this happen to myself, and now when I look back at myself and I cringe. There was time when I started reading Seneca and started reading Stoic philosophy. I would see people around me and I would like judge them in a way. I would be like, what is this person talking about? Like, what does this person know about life and about time and about the virtues? First of all, there's no way to know what this other person knows without engaging in conversation with them. And second of all, that's not the purpose of all of this reading. The purpose of all this reading is to empathize, to understand that one, all the faults lie within. This is not about being stoic unto another person. It's about stoicism on the inside. People are going through terrible things.
Yeah.
But in the early stages of this, I used to love to have conversations, these long drawn out conversations with people who I know have not read this or participated in it. And to believe like these are my ideas, like, I think this way, which I used to always give the clarifier, like, this is not what I think, this is what's written in this book. But there would be a certain pride inside of me because that I'm winning this argument.
Yeah.
And the frustration in the other person would be further, add further fuel to the fire that I'm winning this argument.
Right.
And then then judging them for it is like, trying to steal the armor out of a dead opponent.
Right.
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 That's what they're talking about, like spoiling the
when I read
the enemy soldier combatant.
As I think about it, it's almost like, to me, it's sort of like when you ruminate on an argument. It's sort of when you go back and replay it, and to the extent that you've, for example,
and gloat over it, maybe.
Yeah. So like, right, because it does still feed into what you're talking about, which is sort of like you take this sort of silent pride.
Yeah.
But really, Socrates did the work for you, and you're just sort of you're the instrument.
Right, but you read it, man. And that guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right. But so that's what it's sort of like. Yeah, it is sort of like gloating. It is sort of like, in a way, it's a waste of time because once you've aligned yourself with truth seeking. There's no point in just sort of ruminating on old arguments that have been settled, and to sort of, almost morbidly just kind of re-examine them. There's sort of a morbid rumination aspect to it that doesn't do you any good. So they make basic, specific restrictions on the guardians that they won't be allowed to do that. And then they move into a very interesting, and I think it's the main point of this section for me, where they start talking about how will we handle going into battle against other Greeks, because they consider the Republic a Greek city, and when we fight other Greeks, we're fighting what we could consider our kin. These are other Greek cities we're fighting, and so they make restrictions that the soldiers will not ravage Greek lands because the Greeks are kin, they're natural friends. So when a Greek fights a Greek, we should consider it more like a civil war. This isn't like a completely foreign barbarian enemy that we're fighting. And he says that this should be considered more of a civil war. And so therefore we should leave room for peacemaking in the end, because he thinks the natural arc of kin is that they should harmonize with one another, be able to work together, to work to cooperate. And this is where I'm interested to hear what your interpretation of these ideas, these restrictions of what the soldiers can and can't do when it comes to fighting other Greeks.
Yeah.
Like, what is that in terms of the mindscape analogy of the Republic?
Yeah, I think that this feeds into what we were just discussing.
Yeah, it does.
Right, where one cannot at any point believe that they have the best, the most well-ordered republic inside of their mind. This is a process. The republic is never formed; it's forming all the whole time, because the rational principle is forming the whole time. And having a conversation with someone who's leading an examined life, is in the pursuit of the examined life, is akin. It's two republics as one.
Yeah.
Right? It takes us back to, remember the happiness episode that we did? There was a time, the first time we recorded it, we were like, this is ridiculous. We have absolutely differing ideas of what happiness is. And then we spent an entire night conversing about happiness. And then we recorded the episode and there was unison there.
Yeah.
It wasn't that...
But we both were like, we're not going to stop until it makes sense to us.
Right.
Like, we essentially had our own Republic conversation, and we stayed up all night, and we're like, no. Like, this has to make sense. We're not going to quit.
Right.
And in a way, we were in conversation with the concept. I mean, yes, we were deliberating, but we were stripping down and getting to it. And admittedly, you had done more reading about it, and we eventually came to a mutual understanding. And so then that's where that happiness episode came out, right?
Yeah, and you're gracious in saying that, but at the end of it, it wasn't me completely destroying your...
So you weren't gloating after that?
I was gloating after that. Let me put it that way, right? Like there was...
all my soldiers were like dead on the battlefield, and you're like
peeling the armor off,
picking all the gold chains off of them.
Screw you, Eddie. No, but you see what I mean? Yeah. That is... Because at the end of that, there wasn't a victor and a vanquished.
Yeah.
It was kinship, it was friendship.
Right.
You and me...
It was a mutual realization, like, yes, this makes sense. Right.
We were as one. We started thinking as one, right? So that would be, do not completely destroy an argument that comes from like-minded person, a republic that is being ordered and formed, someone who's living an examined life. And a barbarian in this situation would be thoughts that come from sources that are unexamined. And this goes back to the ideology that I was talking about, this radicalization. Mm-hmm. You see? If one is leading an examined life, very unlikely that they'll get radicalized.
Right. Because you'll constantly be saying, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Does this make sense?
Right. And the opposition to a radicalization would be either one of these walls are impenetrable, you cannot come and assail it, or it would be of relentless attack and absolute destruction.
Right.
There's going to be no middle ground of trying to make sense or trying to empathize with someone who's not thinking from the standpoint of the common good or leading an examined life. So I think that's where the difference is.
Yeah, one side is obsessed with bitterness, the radicalization.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like the cowardly outsourcing of your critical faculties. And then you have another side that's obsessed with some form of political glory, and where you're basically, it's scorched earth. You just scream more loudly. You don't try to make any points or examine, and that would be outsourcing your critical faculties in a favor of
radicalization. Though can be. No, I'm not talking about going and blowing yourself up in a bus full of people.
No. I'm talking about what's happening at an intellectual level.
Yeah, and even that definitely is radicalization. But I'm even talking about the insidious radicalization that happens about how one should behave in conventional society.
Right.
The pursuits.
Radicalization is insidious at the population level,
correct,
right? But within the mind of the radical person, it's not. It's a complete domination of concepts without critical analysis.
Yeah, I see. Right? But what I mean to say is that the insidious radicalization that takes place, the way we think about...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
The way we think about conventional society and our role in it, we are actually, in a way, radicalized.
Yeah.
You could think of it that way, right? And but once one starts leading an examined life, they're unlikely to be radicalized by the conventional forces
Right.
of the insidious conventional forces
Right.
that are trying to, play on their mind and trying to create an argument that could break down the walls inside the republic of the mind. So you require courage. You require to have self-respect, and in order to prevent yourself to be radicalized by conventional society.
Right. I mean, so we talk about the middle ground, which is where courage is, and then there's the extreme rashness on one side, the scorched earth, and then there's the cowardice on the other side. But in real life, those extremes are even rare themselves. What most people, you and I included, navigate is that zone around the middle. And in some areas we are cowardly and we're adopting and living in accordance with convention, and in other areas we're kind of embracing our own biases, knowingly or unknowingly, and we're sort of closer to that rash part of things. And so, but examination is always self-correcting to the extent that you commit to it and follow a rational principle, as you point out, and it'll always drive you toward this middle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And this, I might be oversharing a little bit, but this is what I was talking about when I was talking about the professional decisions that I've been making, knowing going in that there is going to be this war, that my ideas are going to be assailed from without, and my guardians may perish, right? But going in examined, understanding the nature of the danger that exists, and not foolhardily just rushing into it, has allowed me to preserve the way I think. It's not easy. The battle is still ongoing, but I'm able to go back to who I am, and win in certain areas because of that. It's not a complete onslaught. It's not a complete radicalization.
Yeah. So there's another interpretation that I took from this discussion about how Greek soldiers should handle themselves when they're in battle with fellow Greeks. And so the analogy going from the Republic to the Mindscape. So remember, we're talking about justice in the soul, being emerging from justice, feeding and emerging from justice in the state. And now when it comes to warfare, we're talking about justice among states, or the ramifications of justice or injustice among states. And I think the point that I draw from this is one that I would say all war is civil war. All war is civil war because it involves conflict with kin. And not in a biological or hereditary sense, but kin in the sense that your opponent, like you, and as much as you, deserves justice, and harming and injuring your kin would be to act unjustly, which we know harms you. So to act unjustly harms you or represents an immediate imbalance or disharmony within your own soul, right? Because if the three elements of your soul are not in balance, then you will be unjust. So therefore, to harm others necessitates harming your own soul. And to do wrong means that you are wronging yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that is something you can draw directly from this conversation about, like, this is why we'll not enslave Greeks. This is why we will not burn down their houses, because we are kin. Now, the Mindscape analogy to that is that once you have a deep understanding of examination and virtue and a rational principle, you will understand that just as you deserve and have a drive now toward well-being that's rationally motivated, you realize that everybody you see around you deserves the same thing. So you would actually have to throw your own soul out of balance to suddenly say, all right, well, I'm choosing to take advantage of this person and do something unjust toward them. If you really had this commitment toward virtue, you would understand that I can't do that and this goes back beautifully to apology. I'd say one of the main critiques that Socrates had to the jurors was like, you guys have no idea that you guys are harming yourselves by killing me. And that was the point he was trying to make. And he chides them at the end and said, you guys should be more concerned about the status of your own soul. So when you go back and read Apology after reading Republic, all the stuff that Socrates was talking about makes a lot more sense at a deeper level. Because Socrates, I think, was seeing at that point, he's like, these people have no idea that they're harming themselves.
I'm now that you brought that up, that's true. That maybe another way to read the Apology would be to read Apology from the standpoint of Socrates being either a guardian or the philosopher king inside of a rational mind, and how an unorganized republic inside the mind would deal with a gold thought.
Yeah.
If there was no justice.
He was the soldier that got captured.
Not only the soldier got, yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that because this is captured by the enemy. I'm saying that this was a philosopher king who was unjustly unfairly dealt with because there was no ordered republic. In an ordered republic, justice, the definition of justice, which we know, is that everybody there's a common interest. And because there's a common interest, there is no yours or mine. And that only happens when there is temperance, where each strata of society understands their role and understands that there is an apex thought, and that apex thought should then govern all the other thoughts. And if there is no temperance, there is no justice. And in that situation, the apex thoughts gets killed.
They get drowned out. They get snuffed out.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe they should probably go back and read the Apology. Maybe all of those. There's a reason why Socrates features in them, or the Athenian stranger, because they are, that's the apex principle. And the Republic then talks about, which is a great segue, because we're going to come to that next.
Right.
About the philosopher king and who the philosopher king is.
Right, exactly. And I agree with that. It all ties in beautifully. Here's the quote from Apology, though, just to go back. So he's talking to the jurors. He's like, Socrates says, "You may be sure that if you put me to death, a man of the sort I said I was just now, you won't harm me more than you harm yourselves."
That's right. If you get rid of the philosopher king, the Republic is going to go down. Right. There's no question. The Republic inside of your mind.
That's just one example. I think there's other examples.
There are several. Maybe going back and reading it from this perspective.
It's like, you guys are right.
All of this is happening inside of our mind. This happens every day. There are philosopher kings being killed inside of our minds every day. Gold thoughts. And there's some bronze money-making thought that's ruling roost.
Right. That's like they're seeing the evidence and willfully ignoring it, or not even recognizing it.
Or the majority wins.
So in one situation, you have moral ignorance, or in the other one, you have intellectual ignorance, but it's ignorance nonetheless.
Right. And if you look at the Apology, man, we are talking about the Apology here, but we'll read it and we'll come back to it. I think that'll be a cool exercise for you and me to do. But anyway, going ahead. But there's a great segue, which I think it's important.
Yeah,
we can stop now.
We're going to stop here.
Segue.
And then this is perfect, because now we're going to go right into
Philosopher King,
which is I think this is the crystalline section of this book. This is where we talk about the philosopher king, and so we'll talk about that in the next episode.
Let's do it.
All right.